Hi everybody. It gets dark a little early these days, and I can't work outside in the dark on the high scaffolds. So I thought I'd make a video telling you about log gables. That's an option when you build a log house. You can have log gables or you can have frame gables. And since I chose to do log gables, I can show you how I did it and explain some things about it. Because when I just started building mine, I didn't have a lot of information about log gables because not a lot of people do that. So first, the disadvantage of log gables is they're a little harder to build than, say, just building a log box for your house and then putting a frame gable on each end. But the advantage, I think, they look nicer. And they look more authentic. It gives you more logs. Another advantage is that boundary between the logs and the frame gable might limit what you could do in placing windows or wall hangings or other things. But if you have log gables, it's logs all the way up and you can put windows wherever you want. And I'll show you in my case, I have windows right across that boundary. So let me show you my log gables and then explain some things about how I built them. We'll start with just having a look at what you see when you come in my building through the front door. You can see that my log walls continue on up until the roof, and then in the gable it's all logs. And you can see there I have windows that go right across the boundary between the gable and the log wall. Now if I'm up in the loft, you can get a better, or at least a different view of that gable, and you can see where the box would have ended if you had used frame gables. These logs continue up, and in that boundary there's windows. And that's not only true for the front end of the building, it's true in the back end of the building. So this is, you can see here on the right the log wall ends, but then the gable starts, and there are windows in that boundary. Okay, I'm going to show you some details about how I built my house. And in addition to using log gables, I used the button pass method with rebar spikes and brick mortar chinking. And so I'll show you how I built my gables using those methods. And another method that might not be used by other people is that I use DJI rafters on 16-inch centers. A lot of people will use log rafters with car decking or other methods of making a roof. So I can only speak to my method. That is, how do you interface a rafter roof with pine boards for ceilings to log gables. And if you have other variables, if you're doing it different than that, then I can't help you unless this makes sense. So to start with, I want to show you the log walls in the method I use. I use round logs that are lumpy. They're not milled in any way at all, so the logs are as they come. And on the ends of the walls, the logs don't meet, because if you take two logs, they're not straight and they're not uniform, so if you put one on top of the other, the odds are they're only going to touch in two places. Every place else there'll be a gap of some size. So typically there'll be a gap between the logs that could be as much as a couple inches. And what I do, incidentally, these logs are spiked together with rebar spikes, so every course there's a rebar spike going like this, all the way through this log and halfway through this one, and then there's another one that goes all the way through this log and halfway into this one. And those actually form a steel column that's continuous because it's bound together here all the way from the roof to the foundation, and that holds the building up, keeps it from settling. So using this method, you don't have to worry anything about slip joints, or you can have all the columns you want, as you can see, and you don't have to worry about the building changing its geometry. It stays exactly in the same configuration all the time. Now, in these gaps, they're plugged with a filling of fiberglass insulation in the middle, and then brick mortar on the outside. Now, my profile for the brick mortar looks like this. Different people do it different ways, but it worked good to make them convex, and so that's what I did.
Now, to help visualize what's going on, this picture shows the gable wall, the front gable wall, under construction, and you can see that the slanty cut on the logs, and those slanty cuts were made as each log was spiked into place, and the contour for the cut was scribed using 4 tight mason strings that establish the plane that's on top of the purlins, and different times I tied the strings to different things, but 2 strings on each side of the gable wall, and then by sighting across the 2 strings using a magic marker, you can scribe the log for that plane of the bottom part of the ceiling. And that's how those cuts were made. In this second picture, you can see the look of the face of those cuts on the ends of the logs from the top down. They give you something to visualize as we go through the process.
But at any rate, that's the typical cross-section of a log wall. So when you look at the gables are cut slanty, so the typical cross-section, well, if you look down perpendicular to a gable wall, what you would see is these long ovals, because when you cut a log slantways, you get these long ovals. Actually, they're ellipses. And it's the same as this, except it's stretched out. So what you have here is you have chinking that goes like this. That's brick mortar in my case. So you have to imagine these are logs. Log ends. The gable or the logs actually run up like this. I think you get the idea. So the question is, how do you connect a log gable with a rafter roof? And what I want to show you is a couple of typical cross sections. One would be through here, and one would be right through the chinking. If you can imagine that, cutting a cross section through the wall perpendicular to the face of or perpendicular to the roof. And what you'd see here is you just see a log that looks like flat top of the log. The log is round underneath, and then the chinking connects it to the next log. If you looked at this, what you'd see is you'd see chinking it'd be like cutting it through here. You'd see the mortar like this, and then the log starting under here. And the rafters are running parallel or perpendicular to this picture. The rafters are going to look something like this. Now I use TJI, but you could use 2x12s. That'll be simpler to draw. And the first question I had is, where do you place those rafters? So here's the top of the roof. and you've got rafters every 16 inches as you go across. And probably should have drawn these in the same level, but you have the same problem, or the same thing going on here. The choice I faced was, do I have one rafter coming right on top of the log wall, that is a rafter running right up this gable, or do I have two rafters straddling the gable like this? And that's what I chose to do. And whether that's a good choice or not is something for you to figure out. I only did it one way, and I'll tell you how I did this method. So I've got a rafter going up like this, and a rafter going up like this on this picture. Now, the plan is, or the reality is, that the ceiling is going to be 1x8 pine boards. And those boards are going to be, the rafters are going to be sitting on the boards, and the boards are going to be laying on top of the log wall. So, in this picture, we have the pine board, the pine ceiling that goes like this. It's a 3/4 inch boards, and the rafters sit right on top of the pine boards. Now, something that's unrelated to the gable is how these rafters bear on the purlins. And I have purlins, you can see up against the wall there, purlins that run perpendicular to the rafters, and on top of each purlin is one of these pine boards, so that the rafters are separated from the purlin by 3/4 of an inch, and then when I put the ceiling boards in later, they can mate with the board that is already on top of the purlins. But now, looking at this picture, these pine boards are running in this direction. And the question is, how do you fasten them to the roof? Of course, you fasten them to the roof by nailing them into the rafters. Then how do you fasten them to this wall? That's the question. And so what I did was I put a 1x2 in this location. That is right on top of the log gable. I nailed a 1x2. So on this picture, the 1x2 would be just nailed right on the flat surfaces of all these logs, running right up the center. And I didn't nail them in very tight. I caulked them really good. But I nailed that 1x2 down. But then I took a 2x6 and nailed it on top of that. And I chamfered the edges of the 2x6 a little bit to come up off of this. But here is a 2x6. And that's spiked down with huge, I think I used 60 penny spikes. Now the 2x6 is going to be on top of this 1x2, so I could clutter my drawing by just drawing it. But that 2x6 is spiked straight through the center, through the 1x2, right down through here. 2 spikes in each log. So I spiked it into this log, I spiked it into this log, and so on. So in the chinking, there's no spike going through there. But in this picture, you'd see that 2x6 right here, and a spike driven right down through here into that log, a big spike. Well, you can see what that does. Now the ceiling boards at this point are not in there. They're at the point that I built the gables, and before the rafters went up, and then even after the rafters were up, there's no ceiling boards in there. Ceiling boards, in my way of doing it, are about the last thing you do. That's maybe smart or dumb. One thing it does is it lets mice and other rodents find ways in cracks before this is sealed up. But you can see now what that leaves is this pocket right here. That ceiling boards can be jammed in, the ends of them jam in against this 1x2, and they're nailed to this rafter, so that holds them pretty tight. And then the same way on this side, there's a ceiling board that jams into that pocket. The bottom is held up by the logs and the chinking, and the top is held down by that chamfered 2x6.
Now, since I chinked the wall before I put the ceiling boards in, you have the problem of getting that interface between the chinking and the ceiling board nice and tight. And to achieve that, I jammed a scrap 1x board into the pocket and then chinked up against that scrap board. And in this picture you can see it. You see those rafters as you get close to the log wall. Well, what looks like a little rafter a couple inches away from the other rafter is that scrap board. And that's jammed into that slot, and the chinking then is troweled right up against it. And after the chinking is set, then you gently tap that board loose without breaking the chinking and get it back out of there, and the ceiling boards go back in that slot. And then they're nailed right close to it, because these rafters aren't all that far away. I have them on 16-inch centers, which means there's 14.5 inches in between them, and my logs are 10-inch diameter, so that's only a couple inches on each side of the log. That isn't nailed. So the ceiling boards aren't nailed to the log. They can't be, because you can't get in there. But they are held fast, because that 2x6 is held fast to the logs with the spikes. So that's the method of binding my ceilings to the gable walls. And so far I'm happy with that method, except that until you get all those ceiling boards in, the mice can wiggle their way in, which is bad news. So I just wanted to take the time to show you how I did log gables, and I want to remind you that if you want to see all the gory details of my project, you go to paulandellen.com. Paul and So once again, thanks for watching.